heading south of the Mason-Dixon. This is the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. Here is your host, Brian McClanahan.
Welcome back to the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. This is your host, Brian McClanahan, and this is episode 297, covering the week of February 14th through February 18th, 2022. Glad to have you back on the program. Very glad to be here. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, like our Gab page, and subscribe to our YouTube page. You can find all those social media accounts at our webpage, abbevilleinstitute.org. That's ABVEVILLE, institute.org. While you're there, give us that email address. We'll give you a free ebook exploring the Southern tradition, written by 20 Abbeville Institute scholars. It's our gift to you just for giving us that email address. And that email address is invaluable because it's how we keep in touch with you. So when we have conferences coming up, when we have any kind of events, any kind of things like our scholarship, which I'll talk about in a minute, you can get the information that way. Of course, you get our daily dose of Dixie Monday through Friday as well, or sometimes Monday through Thursday and then on Saturday. Depends on how the days work out, but you get it 5 times a week, typically. And so that's how we reach you with our material. Also, while you're at abbevilleinstitute.org, don't forget to click on that donate button. We exist on your generous contributions alone. So if you like our podcast, our conferences, our website, all the things we do, please consider a tax-deductible donation to the full extent of the law. We exist because you allow us to exist. Also, click on the shop tab. You can buy your Abbeville Institute apparel, get our logo on high quality embroidered logo on all kinds of cool stuff. So it's a great way to advertise the Institute. You can also click at the top of the page on the mobile app. You can download our free mobile app. You can get the Abbeville Institute on the go. So you can listen to the podcast, our past lectures, all the things we have, access to the website through the Abbeville Institute app. Another great tool that you have at your disposal. Again, free of charge. All these things are free of charge. The website, the podcast, the app, all the social media accounts, all that stuff, everything we do there. It's all free of charge. But to keep all that going does cost money. Now, let me talk about our upcoming webinar. It's going to be an awesome webinar. It's taking place next Thursday, so the 24th. And it's going to be on Abraham Lincoln, the slave trader. This is going to be a fun episode. It's with Kevin Johnson, who has written a new book on Abraham Lincoln and some fascinating things about Lincoln that you may not have gotten. In fact, he came up with a bill of sale in a dusty archive that nobody had ever seen before that conclusively proves that Abraham Lincoln both possessed and then owned slaves. And sold them, by the way. Not just freed them, sold them. So this is, and profited from slavery. So this is it's going to be a great webinar. You got to pay to get into these things. If you're on the email list, you're getting the email about it. They're $10. Okay, so you want to pay, you want to get in there. We do have enough seats, I think, to get most people in. So you want to get on that. It's next Thursday, the 24th. Also, our summer school is coming up. Dates to be announced very shortly. It will be, I think, in early July. So we're working on that right now, but you will have information about that in short order. So those are a couple things. And we have the Douglas Rogers essay contest. It's going to be closing out in about 3 weeks. So if you are an undergraduate and you want to get some cash for college, think about that Douglas Rogers essay contest. Details are on our website. First place is $2,000, so you've got a few weeks to put that together. You're going to need a little bit of time. You can't do it in one night, I wouldn't think. So don't procrastinate. If you're an undergraduate and you want to grab some cash, and you at least have a chance to do it, you want to submit an essay to that contest. Again, details on our website. Go ahead and get that. And as always, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. Let people know you like it. Let people know you're listening to it. That's how we grow the show. And let people know you're reading the Abbeville Institute. We are no longer on Facebook, but if you are on Facebook, share our articles around on Facebook. Let people know what we're doing over here. In fact, if everybody would do that, we wouldn't need a Facebook page, right? So, because people are sharing it there. And we've already talked about why we're not on Facebook. It was because Facebook is ridiculous. But regardless, we are on Gab. So if you want to go to an alternate social media site, you can go to Gab and subscribe and get our articles weekly, or daily, I should say, there. So, let's talk about the material for the week. I found something interesting surfing around on the internet a couple of days ago. I did a search for the Abbeville Institute. Sometimes I do that just to see if anything's being said about the Institute and where it's being said about the Institute. And there's a website called Reddit, Reddit, and it's a place for dorks who sit in their basement in their pajamas and like to be keyboard warriors to go. And particularly there's a what they call a subreddit on the Civil War, the quote-unquote Civil War, which is all Union stuff, right? Anything Confederates pulled off of there almost immediately. Just scrolling through the articles that have been listed. I'm not on Reddit. I have no idea. Of course, you can share our material on Reddit. There is an option to do that. So I found it fascinating. Someone shared Thomas Hubert's article from last week on the Lost Cause, and there was someone who responded. Of course, most of the stuff is the Abbeville Institute's a joke, and I hate these people, and all this other kind of nonsense. These are just a bunch of morons. But there was a post by someone. Everyone's anonymous on here, and that's the point of Reddit. You don't have to show who you are or explain who you are. You just get to. I would assume this person is probably a graduate student or maybe an assistant professor somewhere. And they think they're smart. They think they're hot. And they want to go out there and show the Abbeville Institute how smart they are by posting how bad this article was. The funny thing is, of course, is this loser doesn't even know what he's talking about. He says things that are just platitudes and slogans, things he probably learned in some graduate seminar that, everything the Institute says has been discredited by the last 70 years of historiography. It hasn't. Essentially, what we've gotten in the last 70 years is a bunch of activists who have decided they're going to write history and quote-unquote history, and they're going to take this person's account over this person's account. So, and just to say that Southerners lied. I mean, this is what you get. And so that's part of it, but there's many other things. My point is, when you start hitting the people like this and they start getting really upset with you, you know you're doing everything right because you're infuriating them, and they can't stand it. They lose their minds. They absolutely lose their minds. So these little pajama boys in their basements, or these keyboard warriors that have to go out and show everyone how smart they are, it shows you that we're over target. Also, that our reach is there. I mean, people are talking about things, and it was funny because the Reddit pulled that post down for whatever reason. I don't know. They just decided to pull it down. I guess because it's Abbeville Institute. Oh my gosh, you can't have any of that there. So I thought the Hubert piece was actually very good. I thought that the Hubert piece was accurate in what he was saying about the quote-unquote lost cause and what the other side thinks about it. In fact, it shows you. He wrote a piece, and then the reaction to it is exactly what you would have expected from the morons who are on the other side. They can't stand it. They get upset because they know that he's right. They know that they're righteous cause mythers, and they know their position is so weak that they have to go out and cuss at us and do everything else and say things like, well, the historiography's proved it. No, it hasn't. And this is absolutely hilarious to me. So, regardless, I wanted to pass that along. When you get people on your social media accounts and everything, they get really upset with us. Because they just can't stand to have something that is an establishment. One of the things the other guy said in there, too, is that nobody's saying you can't publish books. Nobody's saying that people with a pro-Southern position can't publish books. Obviously, they can. They can publish any book they want. Nobody's saying they can't do it. Well, let me ask you, I would ask this keyboard warrior a question. Would Simon & Schuster publish a pro-Robert E. Lee biography today? They would publish an anti-Robert E. Lee biography. Well, they publish one that's pro-Lee. Would Simon & Schuster publish anything that would be considered pro-South or pro-Confederacy in any way, even just moderately, something that's at least even-handed today? Obviously not. They wouldn't do it. It'd have to be a book that's critical of Lee or praising social justice warriors who want to take this stuff down. This is exactly what they're going to get. So these people that think they are somehow speaking truth to power, setting down the man, are actually the establishment. In fact, Hubert was correct about all of this. We have to find our own channels and our own things to do because anything promoting the South or the Southern tradition or Southern culture that's not, it's just a bunch of good food. Anything like that, we are searching oftentimes for places to do it. There are very few magazines or any publications that you can do this stuff with. It's all controlled by the establishment. How many university presses would publish something that would be highly critical of, say, Abraham Lincoln? Not many are going to do it, maybe any. I remember I contacted University Press, I won't say which one it is, and I was asking them about a book. And I told this press who my advisor was in graduate school. And he laughed. And he said, "Ha, yeah, is the South going to rise again?" So the point was, from that position, from that conversation, they weren't going to publish my book. They weren't going to do it because they simply have disdain for anything that might contradict what they think about the war or the South. And they don't want to have anybody that might say something positive. In fact, the book that I was talking about it was about a northern subject. But regardless, this is who they are. This is who they are. These little jerks, these little piss ants. And that's what this guy is writing at his keyboard. He's insignificant, and he knows it. And he knows it, which is why he's got to write at his keyboard and try to show everybody how smart he is. So I found it very funny, amusing, actually. I laughed at the whole thing of his little rant. And somebody even pointed this out. Hey, maybe we shouldn't say this stuff. Maybe we should try to engage and be a little more academic or accurate in what we're saying, because maybe people are they don't know, and they drop these things because they know they're false. Of course, anybody who does any research knows it's not true, but maybe they know it's false. And so we need to be more diplomatic with this. And the response was, nah, beat down the lost causers because, they're just a bunch of idiots and they're just in slavery. They just want slavery. This is, yeah, of course, we just want slavery. That's what we're promoting here at the Institute is that. I mean, come on, give me a break. This is how stupid these people actually are. All right, so on to the material for the week. I actually think we had really good material this week. Some great stuff, in fact. We started the week with a very good piece by Boyd Cathy entitled Adventures in Southern and Confederate Cinema. And people are always asking, what movie should I watch? What's pretty good about the South? I mean, what's good about the war? What can I watch that I won't get beat over the head with wokeism or other things? And he had several different suggestions. Of course, some of the more popular stuff, like Gettysburg or Gods and Generals. But he had some suggestions that are maybe a little bit off the beaten path, like Jesse James and the Return of Frank James. These are films that were produced in 1939 and 1940. Or Belle Starr, The Bandit Queen, or Alvarez Kelly. These are all films from the 40s, 50s, 60s, The Raid. One that he had from last decade or so was The Conspirator, produced in 2010. Also, The Sun Shines Bright, 1953, and Rocky Mountain from 1950. I loved what he said about Rocky Mountain. He said, and lastly, an unheralded and unjustly neglected film in the Earl filmography, Rocky Mountain from 1950. Of all the films I cited, he said, this one may be the most straightforward, major pro-Confederate cinematic release available. Set in the mountains of California in the waning days of the war, the story recounts the history and fate of a small 8-member band of Confederate soldiers sent west to raise Confederate supporters in the Pacific State. From the start, it becomes a forlorn mission, supremely heroic but destined to fail. He says, it was so good. He says, and at the end, these 8 Confederates, beset by hundreds of Shoshone Indians, make one final death-defying charge, so impressive and so moving that even the approaching Yankee detachment salutes their fallen sacrifice as swelling strains of Dixie echo. And Spot, at the very end, the little canine appears to have tears in his eyes. The first time I saw it was with a friend, and we had both drunk a couple of shots of Tennessee bourbon. I will admit that by the end of the movie, we both had tears streaming down our faces. So great stuff. And of course, that would just be lost cause nonsense. But here's Hollywood actually doing this. Now, you could say in the 50s and 60s, there was actually equal treatment of these things. You certainly had materials being published. I mean, Kenneth Stamp is publishing his most important works in the 40s, and he was a neo-abolitionist. In fact, Stamp, this is when the idiot said, the 70 years has proven this stuff incorrect. Stamp is on record saying the only reason he's writing, or one of the major reasons he's writing, because he hates Randall and Craven and all the dough faces. And he said if he could do anything, he could go back in the war, he wouldn't be a dough face. What he wants to do is show that all these people are incorrect. So he had an axe to grind with the dominant historiographic trend of the 40s, 50s, 30s, 40s, 50s, which is the blundering generation thesis, and Stamp couldn't stand it. And so he's the neo-abolitionist school. These people are revisionists. And so that particular school of thought becomes dominant. People like James McPherson is a neo-abolitionist. I mean, all these people that put slavery back front and center. And so are they right and the others wrong? Were the others wrong the whole time? Or were they just looking at the same sources and coming up with a different conclusion about what's happening? Were Southerners lying in the 1860s and 70s and 80s and 90s when they're writing about these things, early 20th century? Of course they weren't lying. They knew what they were saying. But you're going to have to say they lie. That's why I say from the beginning, the most important period as a historian of the South is what Richard Reaver covered in his monumental The Southern Tradition at Bay. It's the post-war period that you have to look at, because that's where Southerners were becoming consciously aware that their section and their people were going to be destroyed, ultimately, if they didn't defend it, not just with bullets, but also with the pen. And so you have to do that. And I think that's what's really interesting about that. And the films here, these are good films. And so if you want to, Boyd Cathy is not going to put anything on here that's over the top. Most of it's going to be family friendly, and particularly films produced in the 1950s and 60s are definitely going to be that way. So for the most part. So you can go out and watch those. But I really like that piece. And coupled with that, you have this book review by John Devaney on a Abbeville Institute Press book published just last month, How Radical Republican Anti-Slavery Rhetoric and Violence Precipitated Secession. I think it would be better, the better title would be Violent Abolitionists. Because essentially what happened in the late 1850s is you had a bunch of conservatives. This is a book by David Jonathan White. And he went out and traced the influence of rhetoric on the votes of conservatives and Whigs in the South and what they thought secession meant. Now, these are people that were pro-union. They weren't interested in secession. They weren't interested in leaving. They were pro-union. But because of the violent rhetoric and actions of abolitionists, they became convinced the only way for their security was, the only place for the security was out of the Union. So abolitionists, this is something that Tom Fleming, not of Rockford, but the historian Tom Fleming, wrote a book about this not long ago, along the same idea, and was excoriated for it. Oh my gosh, you're blaming the abolitionists for everything. Well, White shows that secession would not have happened had these abolitionists not been so violent. And had things, and the rhetoric was involved. Now, you can draw some parallels to this. Is rhetoric leading to a division in the United States today? Is it rhetoric and sometimes action? We've seen pretty violent actions, but people are getting afraid of the woke crowd. They're getting afraid of the crowd, the mob, really, the woke mob, and, of course, the federal government backing them. This is becoming a problem. In fact, Devaney says this, Jonathan White's important book addresses these questions. White begins where all good historians begin, by understanding historical actors as they understood themselves. Southern conservatives and unionists are the focus of White's attention. They are the key swing vote, whose views must change if secession has become a reality in the South. Throughout much of the trying decade of the 1850s, these men of moderate and conservative principles remained steadfast in their attachment to the Union. But by 1858, fear began to erode the attachment these men had to the Union, and fear drove them to ultimately throw in with the secessionists. This fear was driven by the violent rhetoric and the violent actions of anti-slavery Northerners and the inability of many conservative Northerners to oppose and universally condemn the same. Now, draw that with what's going on now. What's happening? We've got violent rhetoric, violent social justice rhetoric, and you've got conservatives who are defending it. Think about that. It's okay to take down Confederate monuments. At first, they were doing this. Now they've turned the corner and said, well, wait a second here. But at first, they were defending it. Why? Because it's part of the righteous cause myth. Because that's just something we should do. Not realizing, this is the Straussians, not realizing that by promoting Abraham Lincoln, they're undoing themselves. They need to be saying that Lincoln was highly problematic for America. Now, their bet is that if they went out and became anti-Lincoln, nobody would support them. But I don't think that's the case. When people learn about Lincoln, they're not too fond of him. In fact, 60% of the American public wasn't too fond of Lincoln in 1860. It's not like you're saying something about a guy that people really loved every time he was, even during its time period that he was around, right? So this is the thing. And White's book is even-handed. He shows that Southerners overreacted. In fact, you could have that conversation. Did Southerners overreact to the situation or not? Was secession even warranted in 1860? I mean, certainly you had the very famous debates in the Georgia Secession Convention. Alexander H. Stephens, Benjamin Hill, these people were against secession, and they made some pretty strong arguments in favor of remaining in the Union. So, I mean, this is something we can talk about. One of the arguments, in fact, was that slavery was never better protected than being in the Union. If we leave, it's going to die. We better stay in the Union if we want to protect slavery. If that's really what we're doing. But no. They left anyways. So I find this compelling, and of course, great book. It's an Abbeville Institute Press book. We're really ramping up the press. We're going to beef up that page so you can see all the books we've got. We also have the book on Grover Cleveland, which we talked about last couple of weeks, because Ryan Walters submitted a couple of chapters from that for us to read, Cleveland in the South and Cleveland's Southern Strategy. So get out there and get those Abbeville Institute Press books. You won't be disappointed. They're good academic books. Don Livingston's going to be producing his book. We've got one by James Kibler. Lots of great stuff. So you're going to want those. Now, moving forward from that, we had a great piece by Casey Chalk. Casey Chalk does such a good job. He's a young guy, and he wrote a little piece titled "The South Has No Culture?" ? And he tells a personal story about how when he was younger, he was dating a girl, and they had lived in Europe for a long period of time, and they had extreme disdain for the South. They just didn't like the South because it had no culture. They said it had no culture. And he broke up with her over that because he said, "What are you talking about? The South has plenty of culture. Certainly it doesn't have the old that you have in Europe, where you have these old things going back thousands of years. You don't have that in the South. But you do have a culture, and it's a unique culture and a distinct culture and a beautiful culture to celebrate." And I think that's one thing that we have to understand what we do here. It's not just a discussion of the war, and that's where all these Civil War, quote-unquote, people gravitate towards with what we do because these are just a bunch of lost cause or neo-Confederate, whatever. We do that part of Southern history. It's a 4-year part, but there's so much more that we do. And this week was pretty much dedicated to the war, at least the memory of the war, in one way or another. But we had many weeks where that's not even part of it. We don't even do that at all. And I think that's what we have to take away from this. Our symbol is Jefferson and John Taylor of Caroline and the Jeffersonians. And beyond that, when you talk about Southern history, it's 400 years, right? I mean, this is 400 years of Southern history from Jamestown in 1607 to the modern era 2022. So over 400 years now, and I think that's 415 years. I think that's amazing. All the things, and Casey Chalk brings it up. There's all kinds of things about Southern culture that's great. And it's not just, this backwards, people think it's just backwards, a bunch of backwards people. There's so many things to celebrate in the South, and that's what we try to do at the Institute on a regular basis. So I'm glad to have this piece, and I'm glad that Casey Chalk has decided to write for us. And the image that we use is the Lanier Oak in Brunswick, Georgia, which is where supposedly Sidney Lanier sat under the oak and wrote the Marshes of Glen, and this is where he gathered inspiration. So literature, we've been doing that with Clyde Wilson. We didn't have the series on that this week, the Southern Poems and Poets series, but we're at 19 parts of that, and there's more to come on that. So Southern literature, Southern music. I love the video we did last year with Tom Daniel on Southern music, the little Abbeville U video, which we're going to do more of those, by the way. But that was a great little video, and it was a beautiful representation of what Southern music is and what that means to American culture. Somebody got very upset with it, I think, on YouTube and posted that everything actually came out of the North and you're lying, which was funny to me. But regardless, this is a beautiful part of it. It's what we need to be talking about. And it doesn't matter what these morons say on Reddit or on whatever take-your-pick website. Most of these people are so insignificant, that's why they're writing on Reddit. They have no other voice anywhere else, and they're anonymous. They can just go on Reddit and say what they want. And so they're silly. But the fact is, we have people that write in their own names, and they put this stuff out there, and they do good work, and they want people to read it, and you read it, and you listen to this podcast, and I think that's wonderful. Now, the last couple of pieces for the week, we had a piece by Joe Stromberg. Love Joe Stromberg. He just does such a good job. He's always writing interesting stuff. And this is a piece entitled Suburb to Nothing. A lot of Virginia stuff this week. And so he begins, in 1930, the caustic fellow H.L. Mencken wrote that if the War of 1861 to 65 had gone otherwise, quote, Richmond would be not the dull suburb of nothing that it is now, but a beautiful and consoling second-rate capital comparable to Budapest, Brussels, Stockholm, or The Hague. Think about that. I love that he began with that. If the South had won the war, Richmond would be a beautiful capital. What is it now? Dull suburb of nothing. He titled this piece, A Suburb to Nothing. There's nothing. He said, I had occasion to be downtown Richmond for a few days in both 03 and 07. As of my first visit, something like 2/3 of all storefronts seemed empty. The thriving had definitely run out. As if on modernist purpose, the Confederate White House was surrounded and dwarfed by medical centers, and the adjoining museum was already beginning to be reconstructed by the self-appointed forces of righteousness. On my second visit, the storefronts were as empty as in 03, the thriving had not returned. In a city with a history of sorts, it might seem unwise to destroy many of the outward expressions of that history. To deliberately create a monument avenue without monuments may well border on criminal stupidity. This is true. This is the problem. Richmond is not recognizing why people would actually go there, because they want to see this stuff. Tourism is part of an identity, and the South capitalized on this for years. I go back to the story that an individual told me about Dallas and how he had a couple of Chinese businessmen with him, and they went to Dallas, and they didn't want to see where Kennedy was shot. They wanted to see the Lee Monument in Dallas. This is a huge tourist attraction that nobody is going to be able to see anymore. It's all gone. And people don't even realize how nobody's going to want to go see the dumb stuff they've replaced these things with, the idiotic things. So Stromberg says, Richmond.com was ecstatic about finding a new purpose for Monument Avenue, whatever it might be. After reciting the party line on how such statues came to be and refreshing how Lee's torso was torn from his legs, this outlet complained that over 80 other evil monuments remain standing in Virginia alone. The good work is never done, people. Richmond Mayor LeVar Stoney was quoted as saying, I'm confident we're going to produce something that's the opposite of what this is, while pointing to the strapped-up statue. Of that, there can be little doubt. Complaints about the James River as a social divide were aired, from which we must conclude that the racist old river will have to go or at least be rerouted. This uplifting copy is followed by 100 color photos, including some of the governor and his beaming wife, 4 pictures of the empty pedestal, and 7 of Lee's statue being sawed into pieces. I mean, this is what we're getting. This is why Richmond is a backwards hole. It's awful. And there's nothing there now. It's just a suburb to nothing. And then finally, the last piece of the week is Forrest Marion writing on VMI. He's written several pieces on VMI, and his question is, has critical race theory entered VMI? And of course, his conclusion is, of course it has. It's entered it. The Jackson statue has been taken down. This is, in some ways, kind of an anti-CRT piece, but he concludes by saying, in short, after the last 2 years mounting evidence in 2022 for anyone in leadership at VMI today to deny categorically that CRT is presently an influence on the VMI post must either be 1, ill-informed, 2, disingenuous, or 3, a stealthy advocate of CRT, or in other words, a quiet neo-Marxist. But regardless of the explanation, to those who still deal with facts and the long accepted definition of words, the denial is demonstrably and categorically false. Has CRT entered in the VMI realm? Sadly, undeniably, yes, it has. And so he's given examples here of how VMI, which used to be kind of a bastion for this conservative Virginia, is gone, and it's been taken over. And That's where I said at the beginning when I had this post from this moron on Reddit about how this stuff just isn't happening. This just isn't real. I mean, these Southerners are just making this stuff up. They're just complaining. It's nothing. Are you sure about that? Are you really sure about that? Try to stake your career on writing a positive biography of Robert E. Lee. Or you look at someone like Robert Elder, who just wrote a book on John C. Calhoun. Robert Elder is getting all kinds of accolades, and he writes in various places, some of them a little more conservative than others, and Robert Elder is a nice guy. He teaches at Baylor. So he wrote this biography of Calhoun, but in it, he gives you the standard boilerplate, Calhoun's a bad guy. I don't like Calhoun. He caused the Charleston church massacre, all this other nonsense. You can't write a Margaret Coit version of John C. Calhoun because then you would just be called, a bad guy. You can't do that anymore. So you have to toe the establishment line in how you say things. So who's really running stuff? And again, go back to graduate school. When I was there a long time ago, professor in a class on Reconstruction looked at all the historiography of Reconstruction and said, okay, before you had Foner controlling Reconstruction, and this is not Clyde Wilson, by the way, before you had Foner controlling Reconstruction, you had a wide variety of topics. People had a lot of interest in different things of Reconstruction. Now that Foner's doing it, it's all race. It's all race. That's all it is. So who is really creating a myth in America? Who's doing it? Well, the lefties, the progressives, the Marxists. All these people are duped. They think they're being real scholars and they're tearing down the man and they're speaking truth to power like Karen Cox in her idiotic book that has no evidence whatsoever on many of the things she says. But it doesn't matter because it's establishment. Imagine, do you think a pro-Confederate monument book would get that kind of attention that Karen Cox has received? No, absolutely not. It wouldn't at all. And that's the key to understanding what Hubert was talking about. But of course, this dimwit on Reddit can't get it. All right. Hope you enjoyed this week in review at the Abbeville Institute. Until next time, good day.